It started with a cough, dry, weak, and far too close. The kind of sound that makes you pause, even if you're trying to convince yourself it's nothing. I remember sitting up in bed, heart thumping, straining to hear more. The silence that followed was almost worse than the cough itself, as if the building was holding its breath, waiting for something else to happen. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a neighbor, but the sound chilled me. There was a strange intimacy to it, as if the person on the other side of the wall was closer than any neighbor should be. I wrapped my blanket tighter, hoping the thin fabric would shield me from the unease creeping in. The walls in this old building were thin, but this felt different, too intimate, almost lifeless. Every creak and groan of the floorboards seemed amplified, echoing through the plaster like distant thunder. I could almost feel the history of the place pressing in, the stories and secrets soaked into the wallpaper and wood. The coughing became a rhythm in the early morning quiet, making my new apartment feel even lonelier. It was as if the sound was marking time, reminding me of the hours passing in the darkness. Sometimes I would lie awake, counting the seconds between each cough, wondering who was on the other side and why they sounded so frail. Then came frantic typing, click-clack, relentless, as if someone was racing against time. The keys struck with a desperate urgency, filling the silence with a mechanical heartbeat. I imagined fingers flying over keys, words pouring out in a rush, secrets being recorded in the dead of night. The noise seeped into my bones, unsettling and urgent. It was impossible to relax, impossible to escape the feeling that something was wrong. I found myself holding my breath, listening for the next sound, the next clue to the mystery unfolding just out of sight. Whispers followed, soft and in a language I didn't know, always just out of reach. They drifted through the wall like smoke, curling around my thoughts and making sleep impossible. Sometimes I thought I heard my name, or maybe just wanted to. The voices were never loud, but they were persistent, haunting the edges of my consciousness. I pressed my ear to the wall, desperate to understand, but the words slipped away. All I caught were fragments, syllables, sighs, the faintest hint of emotion. It was like trying to catch water in my hands. The meaning always escaped me, leaving only confusion and a growing sense of dread. These sounds became the soundtrack of Apartment 4A, a constant reminder I wasn't truly alone. Even in the quietest moments I could feel the presence next door, a shadow that stretched across the thin walls and into my life. The apartment, once a place of hope and new beginnings, now felt like a stage for someone else's secrets. Even when I saw no one, the presence next door was impossible to ignore. The light under their door, the shifting shadows, the sense that someone was always just out of sight. I realized then that in this building solitude was an illusion, and the sounds through the wall were only the beginning. The Kensington was charming but worn, its creaky elevator and high ceilings full of stories. My night shifts left me out of sync with the world, making the neighbors' noises impossible to miss. I tried to be understanding. Maybe they worked odd hours too. I wanted to help, to introduce myself, but I never saw anyone from 4B. No footsteps, no mail, no sign of life, just sounds. The more I listened, the more it felt like my neighbor was a ghost, haunting the space between us. The line between neighbor and haunting blurred with every passing day. The coughing worsened, deep and rattling. Someone needed help. Each night the sound echoed through the thin walls, growing more urgent, more desperate. I lay awake listening, heart pounding, wondering if anyone else heard it, or if I was the only one haunted by the struggle next door. The darkness seemed to press in tighter with every fit of coughing, making the air in my own apartment feel heavy and close. The typing slowed, each click weaker, as if the writer was fading away. The once steady rhythm of keys tapping late into the night became sporadic, hesitant. It was as if the words themselves were being choked off, the story unfinished, the author's presence slipping away with every labored breath. I imagined a story left incomplete, a life paused mid-sentence. The whispers grew desperate, pleading in a language I couldn't understand. Sometimes I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to catch a word, a name, anything that might tell me who was suffering. The voices were muffled, urgent, sometimes angry, sometimes afraid. I felt like an intruder, but I couldn't turn away. One morning a chair scraped, then a heavy thud, then silence. The sudden quiet was jarring, a void where noise had always been. I sat up in bed waiting for another sound, but none came. The apartment next door felt emptier than ever, as if the life inside had been snuffed out in an instant. My nursing instincts screamed at me to act. Every part of my training told me that something was wrong, that someone needed help. But fear held me back. Fear of what I might find, fear of crossing a line, fear of being too late. I stood outside 4B, listening. Nothing. The silence on the other side of the door was thick, impenetrable. I pressed my hand to the cool wood, hoping for a sign of life, a shuffle, a cough, anything. But there was only stillness. The silence was suffocating, more terrifying than any sound. It filled the hallway, seeped under the doors, and settled in my chest like a weight. I realized that sometimes the absence of noise is the loudest warning of all. I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. The fear of what might have happened was worse than the fear of finding out. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever I might discover on the other side of that door. I had to know if the person next door was okay. My hand hovered, trembling before I finally knocked, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. I waited, heart in my throat, for any response, but the silence felt final, as if whatever was there had finally stopped. I stood there listening to the quiet, and wondered if I was already too late, or if I was the only one left to care. I wrote a note, just to check in, to offer help. At 4B's door, I hesitated, then knocked, 3 times. No answer. I taped the note to the door and waited, but it stayed untouched. That night, the apartment was silent, until at 3 a.m., 3 knocks echoed from the wall beside my bed. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate, chilling. It wasn't a greeting, it was a message. My blood ran cold as I realized they knew I was there. The knocks weren't friendly, they were a warning. I was no longer just a neighbor, I was part of whatever haunted 4B. The relentless knocks echoed in my mind, growing louder with every passing second. My heart pounded as I rushed down the hallway, desperate to find the landlord, Mr. Henderson, and make sense of what was happening. The air felt thick with unease, and every shadow seemed to stretch and flicker as I hurried along. I poured out the whole story to him, about the knocks, the strange feeling, the note I'd left. He listened, his brow furrowed, but his confusion was obvious. It was as if I was speaking a language he'd never heard before. "There is no apartment 4B, he said, his voice low and steady. "Only 4A, 4C and 4D. There's never been a 4B, not for years." I refused to accept it. I insisted, practically dragging him down the hallway to the exact spot. But when we arrived, there was nothing. No door, no sign of an apartment. Just a seamless, unbroken wall where 4B should have been. The note I'd left earlier had vanished without a trace. Mr. Henderson's expression changed. He hesitated, then finally spoke. "There was a 4B years ago. A young writer lived there. Troubled, they said. He died under mysterious circumstances. After that, the owners sealed it up. No one's been inside since." I pressed my hand against the wall. It was cold, solid, and unyielding. No hint that a door had ever existed. No cracks, no seams, nothing to suggest an apartment had ever been there at all. Mr. Henderson tried to reassure me, blaming my late-night shifts and the creaks and groans of the old building. He said exhaustion could play tricks on the mind, especially in a place as old as this. But I couldn't shake the certainty of what I'd experienced. I knew what I'd heard, what I'd touched. The memory of the knocks, the chill in the air, the feeling of a presence just beyond the wall. It all felt too real to dismiss. I had knocked on a door that wasn't there, reached out to something that shouldn't exist. The sensation of the wood beneath my knuckles, the echo in the hallway, it haunted me. The haunting was real, even if no one else believed it. The building seemed to hold its breath, as if hiding secrets just out of reach, and I was left to wonder what else might be lurking behind those walls. I was left with more questions than answers, and a lingering sense that the past was not as buried as everyone wanted to believe. I needed proof. I recorded the wall all night. Hours of silence, then a whisper. The cough, slow typing, relief and terror mixed. I wasn't imagining it. I took the recording to the police. They shrugged it off as interference or radio signals. No one believed me, just another tired nurse in an old building. But the tape was real. The whispers were full of sorrow, trapped in time. I listened again and again, feeling the loneliness in every sound. The voice was desperate to be heard. I was the only one listening. My last hope, video. I filmed the wall overnight, expecting nothing. But in the footage, the wall shimmered. A thin, pale man stepped out, confused and sad, then vanished back into the plaster. It was the writer, the ghost of 4B. He wasn't threatening, just lost, forever whispering his story. That was my last night in 4A. I packed and left, the whispers following me down the hall, a soft, mournful goodbye. I never learned his name, but I know he's still there, waiting for someone to listen. Sometimes the past lingers in the quietest places, if you listen closely enough.